Rishus Maranan, the audience, those that have chosen to take of their time tonight to delve into a topic, to give some thought to something of importance, to elevate ourselves from the current level of performance in some area. I was asked to discuss something in the area that can enhance the chinuch of our children, their growth and development, and precisely at a time where things seem to be challenging for children, with all that's been going on, the constant changes, the instability, and the unknowns that lay before them, that have become the norm of what every child is used to and has been forced to get used to. We all have, Baruch Hashem, those that we're in contact with on a regular basis, be it children, be it Talmidim. And we have to constantly look for a way to improve and to adapt to the challenges that come their way. I'd like to spend tonight to speak about a rather simple message. We do live in an advanced time where solutions have to be grand, sophisticated. I'm wondering if possibly the answer and the success lies in something smaller and something simple. And because we're looking at a much broader picture, we can sometimes miss something that's quite obvious. If you asked any person, what's his most choicest possession? He'll tell you that it's his children, his family. And if you ask them, for your family and your children, what is most important for you? The answer will be, they should obviously be healthy, and they should be erlich, and they should turn out in a successful way that they could continue in what their parents, grandparents, and Doris till Sinai. If this goes well, if children turn out well, if children are matzliach, children are happy, children are erlich, it can cover up for almost any other tzara that exists in a person's life. If he has that, he's wealthy. If he has that, he feels satisfied and complacent. Chalila, when it doesn't work out, and we're suffering, or even just grappling with challenges, it dampens a lot, and it can almost put aside the ability to enjoy so much else that we may have as a bracha. But if this is lacking, so much be'etzem is lacking. Anyone who's been on either side of the fence can attest to both of them without a doubt. Yet when children are born, and I say the same thing for a Rebbe when a Talmud enters his class, we wish, we hope, we try, but we don't really know what's going to make that difference. How can we be sure that he'll be successful? How can we be sure that he'll reach his potential? How we can be sure that he'll be healthy, beruchnius ubegashmius, emotionally? And the truth is, a lot of it is not in our hands, and we have to acknowledge that from the get-go. Not everything is in our hands. Not everything is given to our bechir, to our free choice. Very often we're limited to the circumstances that we find ourselves, that were given to us from the Borei Olam, with a direct command and charge. Sometimes the task will seem impossible based on the challenges that we were given. And sometimes it really is impossible. And the Eibishter wants us to do our best, but not necessarily succeed. Very often, the system that we have that's available to help us with our children doesn't work and doesn't fit for the one that we have. A lot has to do with what was been predestined from the mazel. And as tzaddikim have told us, only endless tefillah can actually get someone to the point of success, because it's totally in siyata deshmaya. And very often we don't know the kavshi d'rachmana, why Kadosh Baruch Hu does certain things. But having said that, and the realization of our limitations, and the acceptance of the matana, the way Kadosh Baruch Hu gives it to us, we still have the mitzvah of chinuch. We still have the mitzvah to do our best, to lead and direct, and to try to delve into the understanding of our children, the understanding of their challenges, and what can we do, what of our actions can make that difference, that can ultimately steer it in the right direction, and will be zoiche to the Yiddish nachas that we all crave and wish. The question is simple. Why do we need to discuss something if everybody wants it so badly and so deeply? We would pay any price for it. If you ask anybody, what do you do for your children, no matter who he is, what he is, the response immediately is, I'll do anything, I've done everything, I do the best that I can. We all want the results. And truthfully, we all want it now, and many of us maybe want it easily. And maybe that's what we have to try to address tonight. That it's not enough to want, it's not enough to hope, and it's not enough to wish. But it requires a lot of work. And it also requires a certain amount of chachma, a certain amount of intuition, and a certain amount of effort to try to understand the specific needs. And very often, it'll go against our nature to provide the necessity that's needed. And there can be a clash between our nature and the needs, with our wants and the requirements, with what's necessity at this point and what we had wished would be a given. Obviously, we can't even scratch the surface in the small amount of time given. And to be honest, I don't really have the answer. But I'd like to spend tonight to single out a specific point. I've had the zechiyah to spend quite a bit of time with very, very many talmidim and people at large, and sit and hear and listen to challenges that they're going through. Very many of them quite painful to listen to. Very many of them feeling that after we could put ourselves together, it's still so difficult. And I've come to understand that although we would love to believe that every problem has a solution, and that we live in a time where every imperfection has a diagnostic term, and we're living in a time where there's more help than we ever had before. There's all kinds of testing to identify. There are evaluations that can pinpoint. There are services that can attempt to help. There are medications that didn't exist until quite recently. There are therapies that are growing day by day. We have more tutoring available. We have specialists for every detail. And everything has a professional which is simplified to a detail to address. And you would think that based on the advertising, and you would think based on the presentation of it, that everything should be so simple if we could only find out what the problem was, and we could only find it early enough, and we could only afford the intervention, everything would be fine. And yet with time and experience, there are significant letdowns. It's not so simple. It's far from simple. And I'd like to highlight a point, if I may, that sometimes it's not enough to look for the help beyond ourselves. It's not enough to turn to others to grapple with the interventions that are necessary. But there's something that we could forget to do of our own, which may be of utmost importance and can be lost in the shuffle, in looking and searching to find an answer to the problem. And that is to forget our own personal role and how much impact we actually have on the picture. And if I had to highlight one nakuda, one area, which could tell you that if someone is going to have a challenge in his life, if he has this ability, if he's been developed in this with this strength that we'll talk about, the prognosis is so much better. And probably we can say that if he's developed with this, he's a stronger person. And that strength is something that only we can give. And we have to look at that as our sacred duty and as a sacred mission. And that's something that can't be given over to someone else, but it remains with us. I'd like to elaborate a little what I mean. What makes children resilient? What makes children strong to stand up to challenges that they're facing? For hundreds of years, maybe even many hundreds of years, Klal Yisrael was insulated, was isolated. And the type of challenge that came from year to year, from generation to generation, was more or less within the range of the similar nature. And then came the time when change began to take place at a higher pace and reached even the insular communities. And then we began to see Leilenu what the Haskalah did to Klal Yisrael, ripping away large chunks. And now we're faced with children going through a tkufa, going through a period in history. And we stop and think and we wonder, we made it through because we had only a certain level of challenge. When we think of our children, raising their children, bringing the next generation into the world the way it looks today, with all the turmoil, with all the temptation, with all the distraction, with all the openness and the culture that filters into our section, with all the tzaras that we hear about, Hashem Yishmereinu. And we wonder and worry, rightfully so, how will our children make it? Chazal tell us, Binu shnois dar vadar. Binu means not just to think about, but to delve into, to the point where you can understand davar mitoich davar. You can understand it at depth, what's really going on. And shnois dar vadar, Chazal tell us, the tzaddikim said really, the shinoi of dar vadar, the changes that happen from one generation to another. And when you want to be mechanech your children, you need to be binu, you need to understand what is the change that this generation faces. Someone may say, and he's probably right, not probably, for sure, that we have advanced in so many areas. Klal Yisrael, Kenai Nahara, Ken Yirbu, has reached tremendous heights, many that have been unparalleled in our history. The yeshivas have longer hours than ever. Kenai Nahara, the larger crowds than ever. The intense demands that we put on the children are stronger than they were years ago. K'nai Nahar, the Kailalim in Klal Yisrael, are beautiful. We have more help for the children that need help. If you look at large, it's beautiful. And it's emes that it's beautiful. But then, when the percentage and the number of challenges that we find, when we see the resilience of the children being put to test, and those that are in the world that see it, know that we're struggling. It's true that in the large full picture we're doing beautifully K'nai Nahara and Eibishter Zavayta helfen. But we're struggling with the Talmidim being able to conduct themselves in a healthy way for the long term. And maybe the struggles that we have with the emotional health that so many struggle with. And maybe the struggles that we have with so many that end up not being able to fulfill themselves to the point where they can get married happily. And maybe those that struggle after they get married with so many areas. And we want to think to ourselves, what can we do to help them? What can we do to ground them better at the younger ages, to make them more resilient, to be able to stand up with all they may have to? And the nisyonos that come their way, which is something that didn't exist till recently. What's that healthy ingredient to help them weather the storm? If I may say, and obviously I'm not the one to give a geder for Klal Yisrael, I'm going to say a little bit of my own little bit of experience. And it's not a big chiddush, because it doesn't need a big chiddush, because it's something that was given to every single person to do, and therefore it can't be something that requires such professionalism. And if we find a child that grows up to a young adolescent, and an adolescent that grows up into a young adult, and an adult that was able to create a healthy, passionate, strong attachment, which is genuine and deep and real, that's something that will stay with him forever. We have a lot today in the world that we live in that goes at high speed. We have a lot today that in the world that we live in that goes with a lot of diversity and a lot of options. But with the price that we pay for that may be in the quality in and of itself. We can have very, very many friends, but how many of them are real friends? We can spend many hours learning our Gemara, but how much of it is drenched in distraction? And how much of it is bidveikus, which is unadulterated, undiluted? How many have a hobby where they have some passion for of their own? And how many look at their mission in their life as something of their own self that has been attached to it? In a fleeting world where things constantly change, it becomes very difficult to become attached to something in a strong way. When the Torah wants to tell us what it means to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Moshe Rabbeinu's words to us again and again in Sefer Dvarim was, if you want to survive, you're going to have to get to a point of uledavka boy and ubaysid bakon again and again, which means that you need to connect to what you're doing in a way where the connection is deep and genuine. There are different types of connection. You can be in touch with someone. You can be in close proximity. You can actually touch him. You can even be connected. But a davuk means you're glued together and inseparable. We have to think, how can we develop that connection that's felt deeply Chazal tell us, how do you know that a connection is felt deeply? Rabbeinu Bechaya brings it. He says, when you're close to something with deep connection, you don't want to leave it. When you don't want to leave it, no matter how hard it'll be, no matter how difficult it'll be, there's a commitment level which is unbreakable and unshakable. And it comes machmas achavivus. And the question then becomes, how do we give that over? We spent a lot of time and effort and resources figuring out how to help problematic situations. We've spent a lot of emphasis on how to develop proper classroom skills and proper parenting. And the list goes on and on and on. But how much have we stopped to think? How can we get the message that we're trying to give over to be impacted to a level that goes way beneath the surface? Something that, looking back, was almost a given. Looking back, it was something that was given over by osmosis. It was something that we breathed in the air. And today it's become a challenge, which we'll explain soon why it's become so much more challenging today. We teach subjects, we teach lessons, we teach classes. But those are all a mere medium to give over the message that we're trying to convey that will hopefully become a part of the children. Something that will remain long after the lesson is forgotten. Our mission is to impact in a deep way. The message that becomes part of them, the message that will guide them in their decisions, in the future of their lives, something that they'll be ready to be moiser nefesh for, and something that's of value, that cannot be compared to anything else that they have. We want the value of the Torah and mitzvahs to become something deep in their hearts and their minds. We all agree that if academics were mastered at an exceptionally high level, but they remained callous in their attitudes and casual in their connections, it would be a dismal failure. So I wanted to stop and think, what is the ingredient that takes a message, takes a point, and makes an impact on the person to the point that it gets in deeply, to the point that it's there to stay, to the point that it's davuk and stays with him for the future? I was going to try to highlight 3 points that we find in Chazal as well. That when these 3 ingredients exist, it's a world of a difference. And I think if we think a little bit, we'll notice that it's precisely these 3 ingredients that are so difficult in the culture that we live in today. Because the antithesis and the actuality, and I'll say a step further, I think what we crave and what we admire, unknowingly and unwittingly, is the exact opposite, really, of what's required to accomplish this mission that we've all set out on and we look forward to. The first one is, in order to be able to connect to something, it requires a level of menuchas hanefesh, a level of stability, and a level of predictability. A child that finds himself in an unstable environment will naturally have a very hard time connecting to whatever's being taught at that moment. Let me explain what I mean. When things were simple once upon a time, A child growing up knew what he can expect for the next day. He knew that he can rely on those around him. He can assume that he's safe. And he knew that he can know what to expect for the next day. We've been through a period now, and it hasn't been stopping, although no one dreamed it would go on this long. We're wondering what will be tomorrow for the simple child in a simple life and a simple level. Has become something of the unknown. Who ever wondered if there'll be school tomorrow? Will I go to yeshiva? Will I see my Rebbe? Will I see my chaverim? Which child ever wondered if I'm healthy? If I can go next to somebody else because maybe I'll get an illness from him? When did he have to distance himself from his friends and wouldn't allow that closeness of camaraderie that always existed? When were children so in tune to the details of every minute-to-minute piece of news, where that news affected them and those around them? A child living in that world has an endless worry on his mind about the unpredictability of the world. I think it goes a step further. Being that the information is so readily available, and every child has access to it one way or another, even in the most kosher of ways, and they become tuned into the news and the unknowns of the news and the ever-changing moment-to-moment news. And living in a world where predicting has become the job of every little young individual. From the weather to the elections, to everything in between and everything that could happen and will happen, all of a sudden is plaguing every young child with doubt after doubt, after worry after doubt, with a world of unknowns. Someone from once upon a time looking down would think the world has gone insane. He wouldn't recognize what it looks like from what it was once upon a time. This type of doubt, this type of instability is way beyond the simplistic capacity of the brain of the child that needs to have menucha, that needs to have continuity, that needs to have stability, that needs to have a clear mind to incorporate the ideas and messages that we're trying to give them. And yet he's bombarded with information, with doubts. How can he connect? How strong could that glue of connection be if there's dust and dirt between the glue and the wall, the glue and the brain? He may not be consciously aware of it. He may enjoy the news because it becomes the way of living. But think about the impact that will have on a child's ability to stop and think, I have nothing else on my mind besides what my Rebbe is telling me. I have nothing else important besides what my parents are being mechanech me. It's almost like the information taught by the Rebbe is mixed into the large challenge that he has to deal with. Stop and think, what has to become the norm for our children? Something far from stability, something far from menucha, and something far from being worry-free and having nothing else on your mind other than being able to actually focus on what we need to do. Chazal tell us, Hizaru b'bnei aniyim shemehem teitzei soira. Be careful, look out from the children that come from the poor homes, because that's where Torah will grow. And the Ran explains, why is it that Torah will grow there? And a person on his own would think of many different reasons. It's a schus, all kinds of other things. He says a very simplistic explanation. He says, "Mipnei she'ein lohem eisek acher." They have nothing else on their mind to be busy with. They're not worrying, they're not thinking, they're not going anywhere else. It is what it is. If a person can be brought into a world where there's nothing else on his mind other than the focus of what he's doing right now, he has a chance to thrive, and the message is able to go in so much more deeply. The impact is so much stronger. Stop and think of what the regular child goes through today, what he has on his mind. Stop and listen to the conversations that the children are having between each other. They're carrying the world on their shoulders. Even if it's in jest, it automatically has that impact, because they're thinking and they're being fed adult information for young children. We need to see what we can do to counteract that thrust of the world, which has thrust the world into a disarray, where there's almost no time to talk about something important, because there's so much change and news and first aid that needs to be taken care of to get through the day till tomorrow. But let alone for a young child that's growing up. And it's at his formative years. He needs to inculcate into himself at this young age, specifically at this young age, those important messages. And yet, it's diluted with so much dirty water, with so much confusion and instability that doesn't let him get to where he needs to be. If I may, I'll mention a second area that builds connection to what we're doing, allows for the message to an impact to go in deeply. Chazal tell us, if you want to have something of utmost importance, it's going to have to be unique. If you want to love something as your best, you can't have two best. Ein ha'ava mischalekes. You can't love something to pieces and have more than one such. You can't put emphasis as the most important if you're going to have more than one most important. We live at a time, Kenai Nahara Baruch Hashem, of a tremendous amount of shefa. There's bracha. There's plenty of everything. And in the bracha of plenty comes the price of once again diluting what's really important. Once upon a time, when there was less items of every item, naturally, a person connected to what he had. And he felt that attachment to it. And he felt that connection to it. He had a small group of friends. Those were the kids on the block. Those were the kids in his class. That's what he had. He bought clothing. He had his new suit, and that was his special item. Even in simpler items, there was some. He bought a tape, and that was the musical tape that he listened to for a while, and he enjoyed it. He went somewhere. That was the trip that we went on. Today, what's been happening is we're looking to get our children to have the best of everything. And we're looking to give them a lot. And the best of a lot. And a lot of best. But the problem is that once again, it doesn't allow for that attachment. It doesn't allow for the connection to what we're doing. If you have a lot of something, but none of it connects deeply, it's weak. It may be multitasked. It may be multifaceted, but it's fleeting and doesn't allow for that connection to take place. There's no wonder that we can't be connected to one thing when we want so many. I think it goes even a step further. The culture that we have, that we live in around us, whether we like it or not, has come to admire perfection, has come to admire getting the good deal, getting the best of everything, winning at the top of everything that we could think of. And when somebody thinks I can have the best of many, what ends up happening is you have the best of none. When admiration, and I'll go to the point of identity, who I am and what my value is and what I'm worth, is not just who I am, but it's everything about me. And if that's my identity, then I need to be perfect in all those areas. And I need to admire those areas. What happens then is, what's really my core identity is watered down once again. I'll give some mundane examples of what I'm trying to mean. Since when did the telephone that you have decide what kind of person you are? Since when did a boy think to himself that the generation of my musical device turns me into somebody good or bad, worthy or not worthy? Where did it get to the point where a little child can spend a few $100s on a pair of earbuds because otherwise I don't count? Since when did every detail of the clothing make a difference? When all those things are important to them or to us, then what ends up happening is we water down what's really important. And the identity becomes a crisis. Because who am I if I don't have the best of everything that exists? If I didn't make it in the group, if I didn't make it in the peer, if I'm not the top of whatever I have to be? If we want the children to be able to get our message of what's really important, we can give them. We don't need them to be different necessarily. But we have to differentiate. And the differentiation has to be something which is so clear to them between what's important and what's best compared to everything else that is trivial and doesn't come close. We can't expect them to hear about so many important things and connect to them in the most deepest way possible. Obviously, there's Torah and mitzvahs and midas and those type of inyanim, which that's all a chelik of Torah. But once we take the Gashmias world, once we take the materialistic side of things, and we turn that into something which is an identity piece, something that I have to be or else it means something about me, then we're watering down what identity really means. And let's not forget, you can't be dedicated to something when there's endless distraction. Because if there are too many things that are important, those are all going to be distracting. And then the emphasis becomes watered down. Chazal tell us, we see in the Mishnayos and Pirkei Avos, Hu haya omer. He used to say. Well, who's the who and what did he used to say? Give us his name. And what do you mean he used to say? There were probably so many things that he used to say. But the answer was there was something that was special to him beyond everything else. And that was his message of emphasis. And that's what he gave over to his Talmidim as their future of what they should focus on. We need to be able to have a hu hayaimer, what's really important to us. And we can't take for granted that the children know what's important to us. It has to be done in a way where the message is clear beyond the shadow of a doubt. If they see that we admire something else, if we see that we're shy and careful and worried about impressions and people's opinions, and to the point where that overtakes what's really important, then there can't be dedication. There can't be the uniqueness. They can't see that this is something of utmost importance and special. And without that, they're not going to get the message to the deep level that's required to be able to be resilient. And the third nakuda that I was thinking can make a difference in the development of the healthy individual, which can allow for the impact to be deep after we give them a world of stability, disconnected from all the doubting, worrying, predicting, need to be in control, giving that up, dedicating something of importance, that this is our belief, this is our mission, this is where we're going, this is above all else. Then we have to teach them the value of sacrifice. And again, we live in a world where the feeling of entitlement has become ever so strong and more powerful than ever before. Everyone is entitled to everything. It's his right. And therefore, the value of sacrifice has gone down. Because why should I sacrifice if I'm entitled? The connection that someone receives, the connection that's built as a result of true sacrifice, is as deep as ever. Think back to any good deed that you've done in your life. Think back to anybody that you've admired. And the first thing that'll come to mind was his devotion, his selflessness, and his willingness to sacrifice for what he believed in above all else. To remove that feeling of entitlement means that I'm ready to give up for what's important to me. I'm ready to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants of me, whether I feel like it or not, whether it works out for me or not. And this is something that needs to be taught to children at the youngest age possible. Obviously, different levels of sacrifice. You want something, you don't have to have it. Someone else has it. You think you want it. Teach the value of sacrifice for what's really important to us. If we can get our children to live a life of menucha, to be dedicated to what's important with geschmack, and to get them to be willing to sacrifice in a happy way. And we started this from a young age, that this becomes the talk. And Rabbi Isai, we have to realize every one of these nekudas, every one of these points is the farthest thing from what they'll hear from reading the newspaper, talking to their friends, going out into the world. In the hedonistic society, Menuchas HaNefesh means vacant, vacation. Dedication means getting the best of everything to your ability. And sacrifice means beat the system because you're entitled to. Those are the messages that have to be turned around. And you can't turn around those messages in therapy. And you can't give a pill to turn around those messages. And those messages cannot come through a speech. Those are the messages that we give over subtly, day in, day out, every time we interact with a Talmud, with a child. They get to see what's really important to us, what's really the dedication. And are we living in the world that we're stable and we realize that the Eibishter runs the world and we have no reason to worry? And they realize that we don't listen to the news to find out what the Navi Sheker has to say. But the Eibishter runs the world. The type of culture is something that we don't even feel how it impacts us, because it happens by itself, slowly, slowly. The culture, the advertising, the world, the shmooze, is something constantly giving messages. And if we want to undo those messages and put in the positive message, it's going to need at least as many pushes in the other direction. I think they say that the average American person sees, I think the number was about 5,000 advertisements every single day. That's 5,000 messages that are the opposite of the message that we're trying to convey. And if we stop to think, we've invested in classroom management, teaching methodology, diagnostics of disorders, therapy, Kriya specialists, safety, tutoring, all wonderful, important tools which we must continue, obviously. They do a tremendous world of good. But how much have we invested in stopping to think, how much time do I spend on working that the impact of the message should be able to be received in that healthy way? That's something which is given over to the layman because it can't be done in an office. It's got to become the culture which counters the outside culture. We need to create that stability. We need to remove the doubts. We need to give over the message with passion. If it's given over with passion, it can have an effect. If it's given over with passion, it'll last much longer. Keep it with passion. Keep it unique. Sacrifice for it. And it'll become something that's unshakable. So on a practical level, focus on the impact. Stop and think, what can we do? What are the messages that we're giving? What are the messages that they're receiving? What can we do to help them hear the message that we're trying to give them? Look to work to get the message to be impacted deeply. Don't take it for granted. Don't assume that it'll happen on its own. Show admiration to what's real and save the admiration for what's real. Let's give them a chinuch that's undiluted. Understand the impact of the shnois dar v'dar, the shinoi of our current generation, and the time that the children are living through. Develop a hu hayaimer. What's our mission? What's our message to them? Something that they'll hear resonate in their ears forever and ever. Something that will give them the strength to be able to remain starke ehrliche Yidden ad bias gal tzedek meher remeinu amen.
A single candle can't illuminate rooms on its own. So too each of us cannot achieve our potential all alone. We must look past our differences. Diversity is strength. The walls that stand divide us and have caused this exile's length. As pieces of a puzzle that connect into one whole, together we're an image of one nation and one soul. Tonight, look past the surface as we finally unite. There is no obstacle too great, no wrong we cannot right together.
A beam of light cuts through the dark, trying not to fade. twists and turns of buried dreams and dimming foggy haze. We try to find its mighty source, its origin, its home, but never will we feel its warmth if we each search alone. Together, together, united, ignited, as bright as the sun, forever, forever, when we join together, forever as one, together, together, Aguda Achas, we can proudly proclaim, forever, forever, Lasois Ritzeincha, the Leib of Shalem. Though people may not think alike and often disagree, our nation has one Torah, we share its legacy, and when we stand united, sparks dancing as one flame, we become the treasured nation that glorifies His name. Together, together, united, ignited, as bright as the sun, forever, forever, when we join together, forever as one, together, together, Aguda Achas, we can proudly proclaim, forever, forever, Lasois Ritzeincha, Leib of Shalem, together.
Let us stay together, dream together, work together, expand our horizons together, plant Torah seeds together, so that, Be'ezus Hashem, together we will reap a bountiful harvest of achieving that what Ribono Shel Olam expects of Klal Yisrael.
Forever, forever, Lasois Ritzeincha, Leib of Shalem, together, together, united, ignited, as bright as the sun, forever, forever, when we join together, forever as one, together, together.
There are Agudas Yisrael and Torah synonymous.
And this is the purpose of Agudas Yisrael, to fight for the truth.
community is blessed with Askanim, people who care. There's only one place that actually has an address, and that's 42 Broadway, the Agudath Israel of America.
Allah is Makarim Ru Amen.
Only someone like the Aguda could encompass so many worlds and make people feel so proud of what they do. They have Rabbanim that have shiurim, they have Rabbanim that take care of shilas, personal issues, legal issues, whatever we need, the Aguda is there for us.
He said over a shiloh, what happens if somebody...
They do this with tmimus, they do this with sincerity, only for the purpose of the success of other people, and they create the bridge that Rabbi Shera set up for all Klal Yisrael.
Agudath Yisrael truly serves as an umbrella organization.
Nothing stops them from doing whatever they can on behalf of Klal Yisrael.
Klal Yisrael needs an office. Klal Yisrael needs a front.
We need Agudath Yisrael to help us, to guide us.
We have to speak up when we see injustice, when we see something wrong.
And it's a real voice for us for the next 100 years. We're going to need it more and more.
It is not a question of getting involved with Aguda. Aguda is Klal Yisrael.
Let the primary purpose of your life be the purposes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and of the Torah.
Well, that's what Aguda does. They stand up and speak up for all of us.
Accepted the award knowing and looking back at the greatness of Rabbi Shera, the tremendous work the Aguda does, and I couldn't disappoint my grandchildren, who are the great-grandchildren of Rabbi Shera.